Hi, I'm Kim and you're watching Kim Wilson TV. My channel is dedicated to helping victims of narcissistic abuse get free and stay free. Before I get going with this video, I just want to take a moment to thank our friend Brian very much for your donation to our channel's PayPal account. Thank you, Brian. I think most of us would agree that a narcissist behavior is absolutely odious, horrible, vile, disgusting, but it is also, in so many cases, criminal. Not just domestic crime. I'm also talking about serious offenses. And they just seem to get away with it somehow. Have they figured out the path to committing the perfect crime? I want to talk about that today. So many victims and survivors of narcissistic abuse will describe their experience with the narcissist as terrifying, horrifying. And I do believe that heightened sense of anxiety, that sense of panic, that feeling that you're absolutely terrified is your internal intuition kicking in. It is a warning sign. It's a red flag to let each and every one of us know we're in danger. But how much danger are we really in? It really has been your emails and the comments that you guys have left under videos that got me doing some research on the statistics of crime being committed by narcissists. Now, it doesn't matter what aspect of the abuse we talk about, all of it is actually criminal. Let's start with financial abuse. When someone is using fear, intimidation, manipulation to extort money out of a victim, this is a crime. And these crimes actually do provide a victim with some recourse under the law. But unfortunately, victims rarely, if ever, report financial abuse. I think we'd all agree that there are laws in place to protect people from financial abuse. Anytime someone takes your debit card or your credit card out of your wallet without your knowledge, this is a crime. Anytime someone applies for a credit card or credit without your knowledge in your name, this is a crime. And certainly it'd be easy to get into a bitch fest about how the narcissists commit these odious acts of financial abuse and then just skip off to the next person. I mean, people's entire savings have been wiped out. And yes, we will complain about it. We will share amongst ourselves about how we were robbed, how narcissists promised to pay us back but never did. Now, it's easy enough to bitch about this. I myself have bitched about Trevor stealing my money. But did I call the police? No, I didn't. And that's where the problem lies with all of the abuse. So much of it is criminal. Police services are there to protect us, but we so rarely utilize them. Cognitive dissonance and the ensuing brain injury that gaslighting and projection causes. This is real. I'm not making this stuff up. There is loads of clinical research to support this. When someone is constantly bombarding you with gaslighting, lies, shaming, constantly victimizing you, humiliating you, it causes a brain injury. A brain injury much like blunt force trauma. This brain injury is diagnosable. It shows up in an MRI or a CAT scan. This is a very real brain injury, exactly the same as if the narc hit you in the head with a bat. Now, this one's a little trickier. I mean, how do you determine that it was the abuse that caused the brain injury? I mean, the narc could just say you fell down or you hit your head. This one's very, very tricky. And I do believe the more we spread the word about this very real crisis, the more the medical system and the justice system, police services will become aware of this. This is a really serious crime. When someone is causing a diagnosable brain injury that shows up the exact same as blunt force trauma, I mean, this is a major crime. This is outrageous. How many of us are walking around with brain injuries as if we've been hit in the head with a bat and there is no protection, no way to utilize the law in this way? I will tell you that I, on many occasions, experienced a concussion as a result of the verbal abuse. And I know many of you have too. And when someone causes you through intentional actions to sustain a brain injury, they should be punished. And I do believe that this is an area where we really need to work together to spread the word about this. This is horrendous. This is really gravely impacting victims and survivors' lives, and people should be held accountable for this violent act against someone. I'm sorry, did I just call those creatures people? I really didn't mean to use a word like that. I rarely use the word people to describe a narcissist, possibly further evidence of the brain injury I sustained. And this really is an example of a perfect crime. Now, had Trevor actually taken a bat and hit me in the head, he would have been in prison in no time flat. But the fact that he used abuse to cause a brain injury, well, off he skipped on to the next victim. So what constitutes a perfect crime? Well, the perfect crime is when the executor of the crime gets away with it. So we could say that narcissists have certainly found the path to committing the perfect crime. Another example of this is rape by deceit. Now, if you've not heard of rape by deceit, I encourage you to take a look at my video. It's an older one, or Google search the work of Joyce M. Short. Joyce has been a real leader in getting a bright light shone on this aspect of abuse. It is a crime to rape someone. But over the years, there have been some controversy as to what really constitutes consent. I guess, in my opinion, consent is given based on a person's understanding of who the person is that you are consenting to have sex with. So when a narc meets you, targets you, starts to extract all that information out of you, slips off and develops the fake mask, the fake self, the illusion of you, and mirrors it back on you, you then consent to having sex with them based on lies, deception, and illusion. Is that really consent? Well, Joyce says it isn't. Joyce says it's rape. I personally consented to have sex with a narcissist based on lies. Had Trevor told me initially that he had a sexual interest in his little daughters, had he told me that he was going to go on to have an intimate sexual relationship with his biological sister, had he told me he was an unemployable, jobless bum that his parents had to support, wouldn't have looked at the toad in a million years. And that's the truth. Had he told me anything that was honest about himself, I would have turned around and run for the hills. But I gave consent based on lies, deception, manipulation, an illusion. And this is an area that is actually gaining a bit of attention now, because there are so many victims of rape by deceit, or as some call it, romance scams. When you give consent, it is based on what you believe to be factual information. So what happens when none of the information's real, when the person isn't even real, when the person is very likely demonically possessed? Like, who the hell gives consent to have sex with someone that's demonically possessed? Hell, this is rape by deceit. And this, in so many cases, is another example of the perfect crime. The incest. What's with all the incest? Narcissists are notorious for having incestuous sexual relationships. I don't think this is legal in most countries. Like the incest isn't just gross enough, narcissists are notorious for spreading disease. Not by accident, they actually do it with intention. They will source out the type of person that is high risk. They will engage in unprotected sex with them and go straight home to their broken, horrified, traumatized partner and spread disease on them. When you intentionally, knowingly source out disease to spread it, this is criminal. And sadly, this is real. This is all too common with these things. Countless victims of narcissistic abuse have contracted sexually transmitted diseases. In fact, in some cases, it has caused them to lose pregnancies and to have serious, serious health problems as a result. The narcissist is commonly using the biological weapons, syphilis and gonorrhea, to attack victims, and they are rarely, if ever, charged for this crime. I have talked to victims who have lost pregnancies, who have had horrendous long-term health issues as a result of a narcissist intentionally giving them a sexually transmitted disease. This is a perfect crime. Now, when you consider the overwhelmingly vast number of narcissists that actually roam this planet, stalking, hunting people, predators, and you consider the fact that almost 30 million people have died from HIV, I'm going to say that it is my speculation that many deaths were actually intentional murders executed by a narcissist. STDs and the big one, HIV, all biological weapons, in many cases deployed by a narcissist on an unsuspecting victim. This truly is the perfect crime. And of course, we all know that the statistics around suicide and narcissistic abuse are outrageously high. In fact, it's kind of shocking that the high number of suicides amongst victims of narcissistic abuse hasn't got the justice system really paying attention to this, because there's a very, very vast difference, between a depressed person killing theirself and someone killing theirself as a result of well-planned, well-executed, methodical abuse and manipulation that forces someone to believe that suicide is their only option. There was a case very recently, and I did watch the documentary on it. It's about a young couple. They were in their late teens, early 20s. The young guy was very depressed and had suicidal thoughts. The girl, young psychopath, really started encouraging him to kill himself. In fact, he was, at her instruction, in the car, in a garage, and the car was running. He was going to kill himself with carbon monoxide poisoning. He changed his mind. He actually got out of the car. He texted her and said, "Look, I don't want to do this. I've changed my mind." She texted him back and said, "Listen, you gutless coward piece of shit, you get back in that car," and demanded he did it. Well, of course, he did get back in the car. He died, sadly, and when they found his phone, the police did determine that she was largely responsible for his death. And I do believe it is the first case ever where a narcissist has actually been held responsible for a suicide. Her name is Michelle Carter, and you can certainly Google search that case. It's been very well publicized. I do believe she got 15 months. 15 months is a pretty small price to pay, but worse than that, that's one case out of potentially thousands and thousands of really calculated, methodical, first-degree murders, but they end up getting written off as suicides. Perfect crime. Now, as part of my research, I started checking out channels like True Crime and Crime Watch Daily, and the similarities from one homicide to the other is absolutely mind-blowing. Now, of course, to be on a show like that, the culprit, the murderer, the narcissist or psychopath or narcopath is in jail. The victim is dead, and now they're interviewing the victims' families, and every one of them says the same thing. "Oh, my beloved family member met this person. They were swept up in this crazy whirlwind romance. The culprit insisted they get married immediately. He was immediately alienated from the family. The family very quickly lost contact with them." Over and over again, the exact same thing. The thing that we all know to be the early stages of narcissistic abuse. Now, most certainly, not all narcs, narcopaths, or psychopaths are capable of murder, but I think it's safe to say all murderers are one of the cluster Bs. Because they are such well-calculated, intentional, methodical predators, in almost every single episode I've watched, and I just power watched them for several days, the police say the same thing almost in every episode. It was almost the perfect crime. Now, when you consider narcissist traits, their grandiosity, their feeling of being more entitled than other people, they have a very real sense of self-entitlement. When you consider that they genuinely feel that they are above the law, and they prove that over and over again, when you consider their rage, their narc injury, that death fight over something small, I mean, when you add all that together, you are looking at a very, very potentially dangerous entity. They have no ability to reason or to think logically, and they have no emotional regulator. So once narc injured, it's full-on death fight. In many ways, this is good news for us because we've learned how to detect the early warning signs. We know what we're watching for. I'm going to tell you, I'm never getting sucked into some love-bombing idealization thing ever again. I know the warning signs. I know how to avoid the trap. And so do you. So in many ways, this makes us safe from these types of predators if we pay attention to our intuition. I think we'd all agree that in the early phases of our exposure to a narcopath, psychopath, whatever you're dealing with, we did ignore the red flags. And I really want to strongly suggest that none of us do that again. Those built-in warning signs, those red flags, that intuition that was going off shouldn't have been ignored, and it should never be ignored again. Now, I have a very unique opportunity, and I do recognize that not only did I get to experience narcissistic abuse firsthand, but I've also had the chance to look back in retrospect on my abuse. And so many of you have shared your stories with me. I've been able to see a very, very broad picture of narcissistic abuse through my eyes and through your eyes. So I do believe my experience has been quite unique. But what I really take away from this entire experience is the fact that each and every one of us from this point forward can keep ourselves safe from this type of abuse. Again, now, this is not any fear-mongering, and if you're still with the narcissist, we do recognize that you're in a bad situation, but by now, through your research and education, should know how to keep things at a dull roar, how to avoid agitating the narcissist until you can get free. And this should keep you safe until you're able to get out. And get out, you must. Now, I've noticed a real push lately from female psychiatrists and female psychotherapists. I haven't heard this coming out of a male's mouth yet, but I've certainly seen it from several females. And what they're suggesting now is that there is a way for you to manage the abuse, for you to stay in the relationship. And this is very frightening to me. I do believe that all this exposure about narcissistic abuse is producing this backlash that is shaming victims and leading victims to believe that living in misery is somehow in itself a life worth living. Because narcs are so unpredictable, me, you, none of us really have any way of knowing how volatile these creatures are. Now, early in the relationship, of course, Trevor was a blubbering, drunken idiot, and quite often would be murmuring on about how he was going to have his ex-wife killed. I, at that time, wrote that off as drunken babble. But once Trevor got sober, and yes, it was many years later, he was actually worse than when he had been drunk, and he no longer had that buffer excuse of drunkenness. What's he capable of? I really have no idea. But I will tell you that things do not magically come out of people's mouths. And again, I called them people, and I'm sorry for that. But Nothing comes out of anyone's mouth by accident. The things we're saying are products of our thought patterns. And if your narcissist has talked about committing a violent act against you or someone else, this is a pretty good gauge of what they're thinking. And I would certainly suggest that you get the hell out of there. Now, another thing, and I think this is really important, for us to really gain some control over this odious form of abuse, we have to become willing. We have to be willing to put our fear aside. We have to be willing to stand up to these things and call the police when a crime is being committed against you. They will continue to operate under the cover of darkness until we shine a light on them. If a crime is being committed against you, gather evidence. If the narc is calling you and wanting to talk on the phone, ask them to please text so you can have a record of the things that are being said to you. Do what you can to protect yourself. Do what you can to gather evidence so we can get more of these things behind bars. I just want to say that the other day I received another email from a friend here at the channel. Their narc just got 12 months. One by one, we are gaining some control over these things. We are holding them accountable, and they are getting arrested and convicted. So that's good news for all of us, but we've got a long way to go. They're predators and we're the hunted. So keep your eyes open when new people come into your life. Do what you can to keep yourself safe today. Sending love from Mexico. I'm Kim. You're watching Kim Wilson TV. I hope you're having a great narc-free day.